to be here today to talk to you about the power of personal branding. And I like to start off these presentations by saying that I believe in magic. And so I hope to spend the next 45 minutes or so talking about personal branding and really what's the difference between personal and professional branding, and is there actually a difference? And there should be some time left for Q&A following the discussion, and I look forward to hearing from you about that. So first, you might ask a question of why exactly are you here today? There's a great lineup of speakers all day, and thank you so much to Sales Hacker for putting this on. But let's just spend a few minutes to talk about what my goals might be for you as you sit in your home office or wherever you are today, to take a little time out to hear from me. And I am grateful that you're taking this time. So first, my goal is really to learn how do you create a successful career through the building of your personal brand. And we'll talk through a little bit about the tools and things that make personal branding something easier to do than I think it might have been in the past. But then also to really look, to challenge you to look inside and think about things around authenticity. What is your character? What is your mission? Do you think about it? Or do you just wake up each day and just let it unfold? Which there isn't anything wrong with that, but if you really are trying to establish a brand and build your career, there may be some level of intention that must take place in doing that. And then finally, my third goal is really, what is the difference between self-promotion and self-development? I know many people can be very uncomfortable with the idea of self-promotion. They might feel like, well, maybe I'm bragging and I'm uncomfortable bragging about myself, but that's not necessarily what takes place when you want to promote your brand and pay attention to your own personal and professional development. So I'm hoping that you you find a little bit of magic in these goals that I have set out for you today. But first, who am I? Why does it matter? Why would you be spending an hour listening to me today? So I'm currently Global Vice President of a new group called Internet Security Services for Palo Alto Networks. And prior to that, I was leading our inside sales organization for the last 3 years at Palo Alto Networks. And I must admit, it's hard to say that I have 3 decades of experience in leadership and sales experience, and really spend a lot of time focusing on customer value. How is it that the sales organization and teams are bringing value to customers? And even more importantly now, as I spoke in a panel earlier this morning, we're being let into people's homes, into our customers' homes, not just in their offices or just online. I've had an opportunity to speak at a LinkedIn conference on several occasions, and through a lot of these learnings, I wrote a book several years ago, really just about moments in life, moments in time, and really excited to be here to talk a little bit about personal branding today. So when I was in school, I wanted to be a lawyer. That didn't exactly pan out. While I was maybe a little argumentative at home, that didn't end up being the dream that I followed. Instead, sort of by coincidence, I became a salesperson and just started knocking on doors. I did a lot of cold calling. I was selling long distance when long distance actually costs money. And from that, I really knew that I had a passion for developing people and teaching people. And so I found that through being a sales leader. And ultimately, I spent some time as well being a coach, a life coach for a period of time. And I have 3 daughters, 26, 24, and 16. And in fact, my 26-year-old daughter also works at Palo Alto Networks, and she works in our sales enablement organization. So it's kind of fun to be on Zoom calls with her from time to time. And I love sales. I love business. I love growing things, developing things. And the reason we're here today, I am a personal branding advocate. And I think people know how much I care about that. So let's jump in. Let's jump into the branding. So why does your brand matter? And, when you think about the companies that we choose to buy from, what comes first to mind first is that brand. When you think of companies, like Apple, and Apple really became that lifestyle brand. And so what are the kinds of images that come to your head when you think about that brand? Or you think about the cable industry, you think about the airline industry. At times the airline industry really, different brands kind of got a bad rap for things because the airlines have been so much in the public view. So when you think about that, then think about your own brand and why it matters. It matters when you walk in the door. What does it say when you walk out of the door? And now more than ever, our brand, we see the imagery, we see all of that in social media, and we can see that in a lot of what's been happening in our society today. And so when you think about your brand, it can be very confusing. There are a lot of different resources, and people wonder, how deliberate do I need to be? Do I need a plan? And that's just a lot. That's a lot to do when you think, I just want people to value me, or people to like me, or people to follow me. And what is that recipe? A lot of times people come when I might be doing mentoring sessions, and they say, what are the steps? What's the recipe? And I used to scratch my head and say, hard work. But it's more than hard work, because you can work really hard and be a jerk. And I don't think anybody really wants to be a jerk. So I thought about one of my most favorite words, and that is magic. And you are your brand. But it isn't you that necessarily decides what your brand is. It's what others think of you based on the way that you show up. And so I say it takes a little bit of magic. And over the next few minutes, we're going to walk through, the message, the authenticity, the ability to grow your network, and how you might do that. And then what is the impression you're leaving on? And then of course the C around consistency. So let's start with the message. Now, when you're a company, you're messaging, you have a whole team of people, and you think about, what is that message? What's the message that we want to deliver, to our community? And so you have a whole group of people, but when it's yourself, what do you want that message to be? What is about me that makes me different? Why do people want to listen to me, or come work with me, or what have you? And then how do you want to be associated? Your brand is about what people say about you when you walk in and out the door. And so you want your messaging to be very clear, and you don't want to send mixed messages. We hear a lot about that when you talk about personal and interpersonal communication. Am I sending a mixed message? Well, when it's about your brand, what is the messaging that you want out there? Is it, people know that I'm a branding advocate. I think people know that a lot of the brand that I carry is about positivity, is about mindfulness, is about empathy and emotional intelligence. And I think one could see that consistently through my message. And one way to find out what that message and what that brand might be is to ask people that you're close with, whether it's people you work with, family, friends, to give you 5 adjectives that might describe you. And if they're consistently the same, that means your message is probably pretty clear. If they're all very different, you might have a confused message. So that's one thing I would do, is I would challenge you to get some people who know you pretty well to describe you in 3 to 5 words. And that really helps you think about, am I on point with what my message is? And what is meaningful to you? What matters? What matters to you? And so that magic, that's really one of the first things to think about, is what is that message that you want to portray? If people were to hear your name, what would you want them to associate it with? And then it's about being authentic. And authenticity, that word gets thrown around a lot, and it can get misinterpreted. And sometimes people think authenticity is just sharing everything. But as it's defined here, and you can see in this slide, it's about being true to your own personality, your spirit, your character, and are you sincere? There's nothing that irritates me more than someone being phony. And so it's really critical to be authentic. So are you pretending to be someone to make a certain impression, or is it actually you? Is it actually you that's showing up? Or are you doing what someone suggested? I know I have a lot of career conversations, and oftentimes someone will say that, you know, something that they think they should do. And I said, is it something that you want to do, or you think you should do? Well, my parents say that I should do this. And I said, well, then if you go after that, are you really being true to yourself? Can you show up, you know, in an authentic way if you're doing something that isn't you're not passionate about, you're not interested in? And so I think that authenticity is really a critical piece of that brand. And it can be easier said than done, especially with a lot of the pressures that we feel when you're early in your career. You know, you certainly have a lot of peer pressure. And then as you move on in your career, you think that because it's something that you've always done, you should continue to do it. Well, maybe not. Maybe there are times in your career when you want to pivot because you feel like maybe you aren't having the ability to be authentic in what you might be doing in your current situation. And then the G is grow your network. And it's kind of funny because I was going to use N and just call it network, but then the acronym would have been manic instead of magic. So I know we can all be a little manic sometimes, but I chose to say grow your network. And some people think that growing your network is as simple as, you know, certainly on a business side, just going into LinkedIn and clicking on all these names and inviting people to connect into your network. But your network is so much more than that, especially when you're in LinkedIn and you want to, you know, provide value into your network. It's not just about getting; it's about giving. And you know, the phrase, you know, if you want more, give more. And so really think about that. I know that I've received a number of messages from people asking me to recommend them for a job within the company that I might be working in, and I don't even know the person. But they think that simply by being connected on LinkedIn means that we truly are connected. So make sure that you nurture the network that you have. There are other aspects of networking and growing your network, and that's across your community, whether it's through any religious affiliations. You might be engaged in various intramural sports, or if you're a parent, your kids may be participating in sporting events, or they may be in school or doing homeschooling right now. Think about your own college network. The alumni networks across schools is incredibly rich and just a wealth of knowledge. I know I oftentimes get messages on LinkedIn from people that, you know, graduated from the same school that I did, and it creates a familiarity, and it creates a unique connection, not just a blind connection. So I would encourage you, when you think about if you want to advance your career or you want to get into a new type of career, there are just so many ways that you can access people and information, because I find that most people want to help. And if you are in a place where you want to change careers or find a job, tell people. Don't be afraid. You just never know where the next job might come from. And I have to say, in my over 30 years, I've had quite a number of jobs, I have to say. And most of them came, I'd say 90% of the jobs came through someone I know, or that I've worked with, or personal connections that they want to help you out, and they're usually by referrals. And so that's why your brand is also so important, because you would want someone to feel very comfortable referring you in, possibly to their company or through other friends. And one of my favorite phrases that I had a coach one time and talk to me about making decisions. And that phrase is decide, declare, and do what it takes. Or if you're Nike and you think of the Nike brand, what comes to mind? Just do it. And so sometimes deciding can be the hardest part. Deciding what direction you want to go in, deciding what career, deciding if what you're doing is what you want, deciding if it meets your needs. And then once you do decide, then tell everybody, hey, I'm looking to change my career. I'm thinking about this, this, and this. What do you think? Or do you know anyone in this field? And then, of course, once you've told people, you have to do what it takes, because you know that they'll come back to you and say, oh, you told me you were looking maybe for a new career. How's that going? And if you told them that, then you probably have to live up to it. It's kind of like having a workout partner. You want someone else to help hold you accountable to your exercise routine that you've established. And again, like I said, earlier on, it's not really about just finding out what someone can do for you, but really what can you do for them? What are the ways that you give back to your community and to your network? And from time to time, reach out to them when you don't need something, because then down the road, once you do need something, then they would be there just very happy to help. And I know that from personal experience, that oftentimes people will just reach out and say, is there anything that I can do to help you? But you want to make sure that it's very genuine. And or you might comment that you saw some news article about them, or you saw that they got a promotion or what have you. But make it meaningful, because people can see through and can tell the difference between someone who's sincere and someone who's insincere. So those are some really some critical parts. And I spent a lot of time really on the ability to grow your network, but do it in a meaningful way, so that everybody benefits from the interaction with your network. And in terms of networking, a lot of people say, oh, it's so hard to do, with the working from home, and it's limited because you're not able to see people, certainly in the business world, we're not able to see people in conferences or, in sales kickoffs, and it's difficult. But to me, it's just an amazing way to network today. And especially if you're new in a company, you've got people that are sitting there that, have sort of we have a captive audience. So when you think about the ability to meet other people, this is a prime example through Sales Hacker. And this morning when I was on an early morning panel, just seeing the dialogue that in the chat group of the people that came in to sit, it's kind of like sitting next to somebody. You actually get to talk during the session. When you have live sessions, you can't be sitting there chatting to your neighbor or to 5 people at one time and find out who they are. And I saw people sharing their LinkedIn connections and things in the chat group. That's something that you can't do in a live event. So there actually are ways that virtual networking has some benefits that are beyond just the live events. Now, don't get me wrong. Face-to-face networking is a wonderful opportunity, and I'll be excited when we can get back to it. But there are a lot of ways. There are a lot of webinars, podcasts you can participate in. You can be a speaker. It's a great opportunity now for people to share their thoughts and to have a voice. So I wouldn't shy away from them. It's really I think communities like this with Sales Hacker and there are others, these communities are really relevant, more relevant than ever in helping us stay connected. And as I said this on the panel, if any of you were on this morning, we're all wired for connection one way or another. And if it can't be in person, maybe the next best thing is virtual. And so really encourage you to look for other ways. And if you're here, you're obviously leveraging that, but you can leverage the community in the chat group. Get to know some of the people that are listening alongside you, because they may be sharing some of the same interests that you have. And then the eye of magic is really about the impression or the image. What is that impression that you want to leave on people? Whether you're getting a new job, whether you're starting a company, there might be a number of folks on this in this event who are entrepreneurial at heart and might be part of a startup organization and wondering, how do I get my brand out there, my brand and my brand of my company? And, remember, it crosses all platforms. You may think that your Instagram is personal or private or what have you, but people see that as part of your impression. Same thing with Twitter. All of these various social media outlets all lend themselves to being part of your brand. And I know when I had my daughters, looking for jobs as they were graduating college, I kind of teased them and I said, so how's your social media profile looking? How about those pictures of you? Would you mind if your future employer saw them? So just take a look at that to think, is this the impression that I want to leave? And it doesn't mean don't have a good time or anything like that. It just means that people have access to what that impression is. I tease people because I have a thing, about backwards hats. I had an employee that came to work, a new employee that showed up in the office on his first day, and he had on a backwards hat. And I thought, I'm not sure, is that the impression? Most people were dressed very professionally. I understand the hats now because many of us can't get haircuts, although in California, we just got the thumbs up for hair salons and barbers to open. So happy for those business people that they can start working again. And so hats might be okay on Zoom now because of lack of haircuts. But when you're showing up in an office, if you have a wrinkled shirt or a stain on your shirt or, a hole in your shoe or what have you, what does that say? What does that say about you and the impression that you want to leave? And so it's your image. Your impression also is about your performance and your reputation. And there's another acronym that I like, which is called PI, and it's really easy to remember. And it's about your performance. It's about the impression that you give, and then it's about your exposure. So you could have phenomenal performance, make a good impression, and then the exposure says, does anyone even know who I am? So oftentimes if we look at getting promoted within our own companies, and if you're only working with a particular group, you can't assume that the other groups within the company know who you are. So it's really important to gain exposure, have informational meetings with some people in other groups across the company so they can get to know you. Similarly, if you make a great impression and you have a lot of exposure, but your performance is suffering, then you really need to work on your performance. And then finally, if you have great performance and a lot of exposure, but your image is questionable, then what does that say about your brand? So that's just another one. You have the magic, and then you have the pie. So think about those three levers. And if you feel proud about your performance and your impression and the exposure, which you can gain exposure through growing your network, those three things, you want to have those in place. And finally, what's really critical across all of this is consistency. Because if you show up one way one day and another way on a different day, how will they grow to expect and trust you if you don't show up the same way? For example, if I happened to be a very early riser, and I used to have a very long commute. I don't have that today. I used to have a very long commute, and I showed up early every day, and people knew that about me. But if I was early one day and came in late the next day, and then early, and then middle of the day, or what have you, I think people would start to wonder, well, where is she? Can I count on her? Or obviously a huge part of communication these days is email or instant message or Slack or any of these. And if some days you respond and other days you don't, then you're inconsistent. So what does that say about your brand as it relates to follow-up? And as I said before, it's super helpful. Ask people to describe you, because the way you think you are might not always be the way people are receiving you and that kind of information. So consistency, and hence why it's last in in the word magic as it relates to your brand, consistency really sums things up, because you could do all of this work in establishing your own personal and professional brand, and you could ruin it by being inconsistent in how you show up across social media, how you show up in person. If you're one way on social media and then someone sees you in person and you're not that same person, then that really eats away at the trust that you've built. So I always like this, and I like to end the conversation. This part of the conversation, I think this is quite funny, because I believe, one of the hardest professions is sales. And so I really appreciate all of you for joining this discussion. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I think we might be able to open it up for some conversation. So if anybody has any questions, I believe you can ask through the Q&A, and then we can go from there. So here's a question about authenticity, that it can feel vulnerable. It is the case. I know when I published my book, I had a work colleague, this was about 4.5 years ago, a work colleague said to me, well, now when I read aren't you nervous that you wrote a book? Because now we're really going to know you. And I was sort of surprised. I said, well, I think you know me now. There aren't any secrets. There aren't any secrets in that book. And so I think when you show up in an authentic way, you actually really find out, number one, who your friends are. And I think now more than ever, there's a willingness across business professionals as well as just, personal engagement, for people to be more vulnerable. As I said, we're in each other's homes. I'm in my home office. You can see this isn't a fake backdrop. And I actually don't ever put a screen behind me, because I want people to know, where I am and we're speaking. And so I think we're making it a little bit easier to be authentic, but it can be scary. It can be scary. And it doesn't mean sharing everything with everyone. It doesn't mean sharing every emotion. It just means my way of thinking about being authentic is to be real. And when you show up is to be real. So here's another question. It says, how would you go, I just lost it. Just lost the question. Let me scroll back. How would you go about, there's a lot of questions coming in. Starting again with the people you're connected on LinkedIn but haven't engaged with years. That's a great question coming from Bershu on the chat. I think you would go through the different connections on LinkedIn, and you maybe send a little message saying, hey, I was thinking about you, and if it's someone that you know reasonably well, wondering how you've been doing, how 2020 was for you, and I hope that things are going well, and maybe if there's a personal anecdote that you can share. Or another thing that can be even a little bit more intentional is you might find out something that's going on at the company where they work, or something in their industry, and have some sort of commentary on that, something to kind of bridge that connection. But you do want to be, certainly want to be authentic about that. Someone talking about being known for jokes on certain parts in your profile and things like that, but no jokes on LinkedIn. I think that's preserving your brand, and I think as long as you're sort of in good, clean fun. And I have to say, I shy away from politics on social media. I think politics is one to be careful with. I see too much of that, in particular on LinkedIn, and then it becomes somewhat combative. And so I think that's part of your brand, how you want to be perceived there. And let's see, here's some other ones. When you work for a company, how do you make the professional connection with personal and keep it professional. You know, I think we all have to be, you know, I think now more than ever, there is a blurred line between personal and professional. And I would say I would err on the side of being professional. Certainly when you're in a professional setting, if you have shared interests and things like that, you can absolutely have a personal connection. I know that people want to be, you want to be relatable, and you want to be able to relate to people. And so by sharing common interests on a personal note, that just can add for a deeper connection. And I think we all know where we, you know, need to keep lines drawn. And there's nothing wrong with having a personal connection with a professional contact or with a customer. You might, especially now. And I mentioned this on the panel this morning, if any of you were on it, that we're talking to customers, we're seeing their kids come through the door, the doorbells may be ringing, and you have to get up in the middle of a meeting and say, sorry, I have to answer the door. I've had to do that a few times. I've had construction going on at my house and loud noises and gardeners and whatever it is outside your door. That's a personal connection. So personal and professional is going to get blurred. And so I think I wouldn't get overly concerned about it because we are making a personal connection, certainly in these times. Could you really show up authentically and at the same time keep personal and professional separate? I believe yes, because there are certain characteristics of brand that show up a certain way in a professional environment and show up another way in a personal life. And so, you know, if you're a slob at home, and you're not on video, people don't necessarily need to know that about you. You can still be that. And then when you show up at work, you pull it together. But is that really the case? I don't know. If you're a slob at home, is that a characteristic, and then you're going to be a slob at work as well, and then people think that of you? I think how we speak personally and professionally, there's certain things that you might say in a personal setting that you don't in a professional, but that just comes down to good judgment. But I think when you think about brand, like one of the things might be being on time. Being on time in a business setting and being on time in a personal setting are both of high value. And that says that you value yourself and your time, and you value others. If you don't show up, you know, on time to meet your friends, when we're allowed to go to restaurants, if you show up late, what does that say about your brand? If you show up late but you show up on time to a customer meeting, your friends might say, do you show up late to your business meetings, or is it just me that you're being disrespectful to? And so there are ways that certain attributes show up personally and professionally. They might be a little bit different, but I would argue to say that they come from the same place. Here's I like this question from Connie Penton. It says, when you work for a company, how do you make your LinkedIn page also reflect your personal brand? That's a really great statement. And that's one that I think is really important. And I think it's not just about your page. It's about how you engage in the conversations that you engage in. You can engage about your industry, the things going on in your company, but then you can also speak about things that matter to you. For example, I work for a cybersecurity company, so I care a lot about what's going on in the cybersecurity business. I also care about women's issues. And so I often will share things about women in cybersecurity. I care about early in career development. And so I do that both at the company, but then I also will share stories about people early in career, or maybe talk about mentorship and things that matter. And so I think you can put your own personal flair. It's not something like Instagram, or for older people like me, it's not like Facebook. You're not going to be sharing all of those things. But do you know, I sometimes do a little bit of a test. And when you share a little bit more of a personal story on LinkedIn that has a business idea, you get far more people commenting, because they can relate. They can relate to it. And then that extends to the brand of your company, that you're someone who is relatable. So if I share a story about one of my daughters, the fact that she got a job, that she was working at Palo Alto Networks, people were really interested in that just because that's a human connection. And so keep it professional, meaning the language you use and the topics that you choose to share. But people like to see that we are all human. And I love what Anna McKenzie says about being on time is about integrity and honoring your word. Absolutely. And that is so critical in terms of your brand. And it's interesting now with so many Zoom calls, a lot of us are on back-to-back meetings. And so it can be very difficult. You get off one and then onto another, but I try to create a buffer in my schedule when you think about your brand around being on time. Keep a buffer if you can between your meetings, but be respectful when you're showing up. So here's another one who says how to check your own brand perception on LinkedIn. You can ask people. There's also a social selling index that you can look at least to see if people even are paying attention to you. But I would ask others about what impression that you're giving on LinkedIn. Ask people who don't really know you, perhaps, as well, or people who don't know you from a business sense. Maybe ask some friends who you don't work with to check out your LinkedIn profile. I think don't be afraid to ask questions of others. I think a lot of people are willing to help and help each other. So something from Hunter, he says, where's the best place to start if you're trying to change your image? Well, I think the best place personally to start would be to ask others what they think of you and describe you, and then find out the ones that, maybe they're saying things that you think, wow, I didn't know you thought that of me. And if there are those positive things, think, how can I work on those parts of my brand? And then also think, why are you changing? Why are you making the change to your image? And make sure that it's genuine. So if it's something as simple as, I need to make sure I iron my clothes, that could be a simple way to change your image, or kind of how you show up, how you greet people, looking people in the eyes when you speak with them, things like that. And I just want to say, I love engaging questions like this on LinkedIn. So feel free. You can go to my LinkedIn page as well and connect with me and say how it is that you're connecting, and you could say that you were a part of this conversation. I'd be happy to share some ideas specifically about it. But if you're trying to change your image, I'd start with asking people what they think, and then that can help guide you. Let's see. The job is posted on LinkedIn for a company you currently work for. Would you recommend applying through LinkedIn? No, I mean, certainly not if it's a company you currently work for. It just depends, I think, on how large it is. I would do some research if it's a company you currently work for, because you want to get that inside connection. I would imagine you have an internal career website. That's typically the way that those things go. Let's see, I'm trying to see what other questions. All right, so here's another one. What type of content is best for growing personal brand? Blogs, polls, article sharing? I think it's whatever you feel most comfortable doing is what will resonate with people. There have been times when I attempted to do a blog, and when I was really excited about it, I was very consistent. And then life happened and I stopped doing the blog. So if it's something you can do, but with the blog, you just don't know who's listening very often. And to me, that's a little more calculated. But if you have a following and you want to blog and that's something you're interested in and you can find a great community, I think that's great. I think, at least for me with LinkedIn, it often comes from sharing articles. And then not just sharing the article, but what is your point of view about the article? And you can comment on the things that matter to you and you can create engaging conversations. This certainly isn't a commercial for LinkedIn, but another aspect of LinkedIn is is just joining different groups so that you have common interests and you're sharing among a group of people, different ideas that you have, not just the general kind of LinkedIn community, but you can speak across specific groups and share ideas and thoughts and ask for help. I'm not a huge fan personally of polls, unless you're maybe a company that's looking for polling. I'm not a huge fan, but it doesn't mean it doesn't work. I just haven't used that personally in my world. How do you manage a lot of contacts on LinkedIn, for example, when we're in the instant messaging world and keeping in touch with lots of people? It is not realistic at all to keep in touch with everybody. And I don't recommend it. You have thousands of contacts, you can't possibly do that. But from time to time, I would scroll through and just sort of look and say, how many of these people do I really know? Because oftentimes we connect with people that we don't know. We connect with them because we want something from them. And especially if we're in sales, we will connect with someone because we want to sell them something. And so that's another thing to be cautious of, because I know, I'm sure many of us are in some sort of sales capacity, since this is a sales hacker conference. But think about that when you're sending connections to prospects and you just dump information on them and then expect them to respond. Engage in a personal way. I had one of the really fun actually experience with someone who had been prospecting. I was leading sales operations for a company and someone wanted time with me. And he asked if I wanted, he sent a message through LinkedIn, and the topic of the conversation, and maybe this person's on this call right now, I don't know, was a baseball wager. And basically it was about the Giants and the Red Sox game that was playing. And it was sort of a bet. And so if the Giants won, then I would, I wouldn't have to meet with him and I would get a sweatshirt or something. And if the Red Sox won, that I would let him have a 15-minute meeting. What he didn't know is that I'm a huge Red Sox fan, even though I live in the San Francisco area. So long story short, my team won, the Giants won. And so I got a sweatshirt out of the deal, but I also agreed to meet with him. And he also knew that I wasn't the decision maker, but I was an influencer. And so I ended up having a 30-minute call because of the creativity. And just don't be afraid to be creative. And so the brand with that person, I held in high regard. On the flip side, I had someone who called me and hung up and then called again. And I said, kind of didn't like his tactic because he was kind of tricking me into calling. He didn't leave his name or his company name. He just left his first name. He didn't leave his whole name. And I called back because I was new to my company. I didn't know if it was someone that I needed to call. And I said I felt tricked. And then he still asked for the meeting when I said I don't really appreciate that. So anyways, those are the kinds of things that impact your brand. It actually impacted the brand of that person's company too, because I won't ever do business with that particular company because of the tactic of trying to trick me. So if you're in an inside sales type of role, remember that is your brand and it's your company's brand. You're representing your company and yourself in that situation. And so you want to make sure that you're prospecting with integrity, as someone had even said in the chat. A lot of these things come down to your own integrity. Do you believe focusing on challenges your prospects might be facing is better than talking about features and benefits? Absolutely. Absolutely. off the topic of brand, but it does say something about your brand that you might be a good listener and not just talking about features and benefits. So as it relates to your brand, it shows about listening. And I always love the phrase, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason in sales and in life. And to make sure you tune in those ears more often than activating our mouths. Would you agree that attention on social media is the new currency? I don't know necessarily. I think you are your own best currency, and I think it's all about having meaningful conversations, not necessarily so many, but making each connection something of value, and something that's intentional. I think that those are, if that's really what Cynthia is saying, in terms of social media. Social media is certainly an outlet. I have mixed feelings about it, but certainly it's a way to stay connected, and if used properly to foster your brand positively or negatively. We can see some people who really have destroyed their brands by overuse of social media. How can you audit your own value, be sure you're providing what you need to, and how you can improve? That's a really great question. That comes from JC. And in terms of auditing your value, I think people will come to you and tell you. And then also, don't be afraid to ask. If you're having a conversation with somebody, ask them. Say, have I provided value in this conversation, or is there something else that I can share? I think that's sort of a little bit of a lost art, is asking the tough questions. Was this helpful? Because oftentimes we're afraid for the answer. If someone might say no, actually, no, it isn't what I was hoping for. I hope you all got what you wanted out of this conversation. And if you didn't, drop me a line in LinkedIn and say, that wasn't exactly what I was hoping for. I maybe don't want to hear it. It's hard to hear those things, but it's really important to ask, because we can't improve unless we know how we're being perceived. And so I would recommend, it takes courage. It takes courage to ask for feedback. And hopefully, if you're talking to the right people, that they will be mindful when they give you the feedback. From Maxwell, what are your favorite resources for finding engaging content articles? Yeah, HBR, yep. Wall Street Journal. Yeah, oftentimes, to be honest, what I do is I just go to Google and I think about the topics of things that I'm interested, and then I end up going on this really fun journey, and I'll find various articles about the topics that I'm interested in, and I'll read a number of them. And certainly there are trusting sources and some that maybe are less trustworthy, but look at the source of the information. Sometimes I might look at a number of different articles and find data that would be interesting to other readers, and pull together. Or maybe there are a couple of articles on the same topic and they have different opinions, and maybe I'll write a small few sentences about the difference in the various points of view on a topic. So, but I think you're on the right path in terms of some of those are some really great places to find information. And I do read and follow those often. They're good sources for content and sharing ideas. So we have, according to this, we have about 8 minutes. So if you have additional questions, yeah, something, from Tom, certainly not accepting every request to connect. You just can't possibly do that. And I think it's really important, again, it comes back to your brand, to be mindful that you're not just out there sort of spamming for connections because you think it's somehow going to make your life better or easier. So Tom, I respect that. And I like what Carly said about pitch slapping. P as in pitch. make sure that's clear. Yes, sending an email with just a big long pitch that doesn't work. That doesn't resonate, and it can be offensive. It's one thing if someone says, "Can you tell me more?" And then you might send a few things that are meaningful. But there's a lot of that's where LinkedIn, I think, has gotten abused in some respects. And I get it. Led inside sales organizations, you want to make a connection, but make a meaningful connection. You'll get a lot further, I believe. And then also it says something about your brand. Because sometimes I've had people come after, time and time again with the same pitch, then you don't want to be blocked. So I respect the hard work that it takes to make a connection. Take the time to make it a meaningful connection. And in many cases, less is more. By having a meaningful connection, researching the people that you're connecting with, but make a genuine connection when you are reaching out to people on LinkedIn. Is it ever helpful to be transparent and show more of your personal life as far as branding? I think so. It's like I said as part of my brand is the fact that I'm a mother of 3 daughters, and that is part of who I am, and I don't separate that from my professional life. Now, they don't come to work with me. One happens to live with me, and so she is technically at work with me when I'm working from home. But I think as long as you're careful and you're not oversharing, but they might be things that are things that people can relate to. And like I said, especially in this era where the lines are sort of blurred between work and home, it's you're going to show your personal life. Our CEO, when we have our all hands meetings, from time to time, his children's walk in. They come into his office when he's addressing the entire company, and so it's okay. Or we have very senior leaders in our company, and they're sitting in an office that maybe in the back you see that they have a stationary bicycle. That's where they do their exercise or what have you. I think, and I don't think we're going to necessarily go back to as much of a divide between personal and professional. I'd say if there's any silver lining, which I do often try to find the silver lining, if there's any silver lining to this pandemic situation, is that it's making it a little more okay to be human, and that you don't always have to be super human. So someone asked, how do you turn down a connection request nicely or appropriately? I don't know if it's necessarily a nice or not. I just don't respond, because you can't respond to everyone and say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to connect with you. It just depends on the volume, I suppose. Oftentimes I just don't get to it. Sometimes they just stay in my request for connection box, and then I reevaluate them. But it can be a challenge. Sometimes if it's a long email that has a big pitch, I might just reply and say, I'm sorry, I'm not interested. And sort of LinkedIn kind of helps us by giving us some canned responses to those kinds of things. But it can be difficult if someone is trying to connect for a longer period of time. So we have 3 minutes before we hit the top of the hour. So I don't know if there's any last question. What's the best connection request you ever got? I would say the best one was the baseball one. That is the most memorable and most positively memorable one that I have received, because it was incredibly genuine. It was creative, and I talk about it all the time, actually. If you go to YouTube, I think you can type in my name and LinkedIn Sales Conference 2016, I think. And that's, I actually tell the story live at the LinkedIn conference if you're interested. So you can see that there. Well, in the last 2 minutes, I just want to say thank you so much to Sales Hacker and to Outreach we've had a nice long relationship, and I hope to continue it as we go forward. And it's been my honor and privilege to get to speak to this community, and grateful. And I hope you got something out of it. You found value. If you did find value and you want to share that with me, you can certainly reach out to me on LinkedIn. And if it wasn't what you wanted and you wanted something different or more, you can also tell me that on LinkedIn as well. So I appreciate the time with everybody, and I hope the rest of your day